Greetings once again, my fellow expressions of consciousness. It's funny that I use the word consciousness because in this video I'm going to react to Jordan Peterson, Understanding the Mystery of Consciousness. So I'm going to give my opinions, my perspective on this. As you may know, consciousness is one of my topics. It's what I would suggest I know quite a lot about. So let's see where he's coming from.
And there's something about the world, at least insofar as we're in it as human beings, that...
Right there. Are we in the world as human beings? Or do we perceive the world as consciousness? There is a big distinction there. I know he's building up, but I just had to say that right now.
Is dependent on conscious experience of the world. Now, of course, you can take consciousness out of the world and say, well, if none of us were here, if there was no such thing as consciousness, then the cosmos would continue running the way it is running. But of course, it depends on what exactly you mean by the cosmos when you make a statement like that.
True, because he just said, oh, you could remove consciousness or your experience from the world, and the world or the cosmos will still run. But that is an assumption only. You can only make that statement as an assumption. I'm not saying this to say that he doesn't know that, but many people suggest that the world or the cosmos, the universe, exists independent of consciousness. It's a really important distinction and question to answer. Is the cosmos, is phenomenal experience separate from the perceiver? That's essentially what we're talking about there. And I suggest, of course, it's not. It's one and the same.
Because there's something about the subjective experience of reality that gives it reality. Or at least that's one way of looking at it. And since we're all pretty enamored of our own consciousnesses, although they're painful because they define our being.
Consciousness doesn't define our being, in a sense that consciousness isn't a thing that can be defined. It is our being, but it doesn't define our being. For example, you might say you are defined by the amount of trophies you've won in a tennis match. That doesn't really define who you are. You're deeper than that. So even consciousness, it's so everything that it doesn't define who we are. Because everything is consciousness, it becomes a misnomer to say we are defined by it. Now, of course, there are different levels of talking about consciousness right now. From a human perspective, yes, you could say it defines us. But I just want to give you a deeper perspective. And I'm aware he can't say everything in one moment for any Jordan Peterson fans out there. I'm not having a go at him. I'm just taking it to another level. Because to say that we are defined by consciousness would suggest that there's something other than consciousness. Oh, we're defined by consciousness, not bricks, not matter. There is only consciousness. Any words that we say are not actually bringing us closer to the truth, because it's what we essentially are. And we know this without even speaking. You know you are conscious even without the understanding of the word consciousness. You don't even need it. So it's simply just what we are. There is no other to it for us to be defined against another thing, another idea.
It's not unreasonable to give consciousness a kind of metaphysical primacy. Now, and it's deeper than that, you know, it's deeper idea than that, because there are physicists, and they're not trivial physicists like John Wheeler, who believes that in some sense consciousness plays a constitutive role in transforming the chaotic potential of being into the actuality of being.
This physicist believes consciousness plays some role in bringing the potential of being into being. This is what makes me question how deeply scientists are really looking into consciousness, to suggest that it only plays a part when it's self-evident that you need consciousness to even do your experiments. It's really straightforward, but scientists like to go the long way around of looking for objective fact or empirical evidence. I know there are some scientists leaning finally towards the idea that consciousness is fundamental, but not enough are. It's really quite direct, but unless you've had the experience of it and you've exhausted your questions, you're still gonna be unsure whether consciousness is pivotal in this realm of perception, or not perception, but of being, of matter.
He actually thinks about it, he's not alive anymore, but he actually thought about it as playing a constitutive role, you know. And then from the neurobiological perspective, or from the scientific perspective, it's like consciousness is not something we understand. I don't think we understand it at all.
Consciousness is not something we understand at all. Because you are trying, you in this plural sense, scientists, to put consciousness in a box. You're trying to examine consciousness within this world. When you know in your direct experience, you are consciousness, you are that which you've been seeking. So you need to study yourself with a capital S. You need to do the introspection. Or, from the perspective of Bhakti Yoga, just live in love and acceptance and gratitude for it. You can call it God if you want to. Because it's unquestionable that there is no experience without consciousness. It's also upon you, the seeker, to try and find this consciousness. Nobody can find it in the body, no surgeon, nobody. Yet it's self-evident that we are conscious. Isn't that incredible? So you don't know it if you're looking for it. You can't look for that which you are. You can only realize what you are. You can only be what you are. You can only remove the veil from ignorance, from illusion, to remember what you are. That's the way, my friends.
It's something we can't get a handle on with our fundamental materialist philosophy. And I don't know why that is. It's quite frustrating if you're a...
Did he really just say, I don't know why it is that with our materialistic philosophy, why we can't get to the root of consciousness? He essentially says something like that, or basically says something like that. It's very clear, my friend. Because materialism removes consciousness as the primary ground of experience. It suggests that materialism is first of all real, like there is such thing as matter, like these hands are actually things within existence, as opposed to a perception within existence, and the perception, the perceiver of the experience is non-physical, is consciousness. There's no distinction, there's no separation between the perceiver and the hand. So you could say that there's a hand being perceived, but you can also say there is just experience taking place. An experience in and of itself is a non-physical thing, phenomenon. Consciousness is a non-physical phenomenon. So either there is the perception of the hand, or there's just experience taking place. There's just a conscious moment taking place. Then when you look at consciousness, the conscious moment, you see it's not a physical thing. You can't find the conscious moment. You are consciousness perceiving a moment. Just as when you are dreaming, there's no separation between your dream hand and the mind. It's made of the same stuff. It's a dream hand. It's a mind hand. But if you believe you are the dream body, then you might still seek and find the answer to, are you perceiving the hand, or is there just the conscious moment? And as you really know, when you wake up, there was just the mind to that dream. So the hand was the dream. In the same way, in this conscious moment, the hand, the screen, everything is just this consciousness, which is non-physical. I'm laughing because it's so amazing how beautiful it is. It's amazing.
Scientist, but it isn't clear to me that we've made any progress whatsoever in understanding consciousness, even though, well, we've been trying to understand it for hundreds of years, and even though psychologists...
I have to shout out the ancient yogis of India who have known what consciousness is for thousands of years.
And neurobiologists and so forth have really put a lot of effort into understanding consciousness from a scientific perspective in the last 50 years. So anyways, what it seems to me is the idea that God used the word to extract habitable order out of chaos at the beginning of time, which is roughly the right way of thinking about it, seems to me deeply allied with the idea that what it is that we do as human beings.
I'll suggest that Bible verse about God in the beginning was the Word, is that the Word creates a difference. It creates distinction. God and the Word was with God. So the acknowledgement of the Word is the acknowledgement of, that wholeness that is God, yet also with that wholeness is the duality represented as the Word. Because there's God and the Word. God and the Word. There's reality and experience. Reality and experience. This is one universe and many things within it. One universe and many things within it. There's your one body and many cells. Your one body and many cells. So there's always this oneness. If you look deeply into any particular moment or situation, plus the experiences within that moment or object that create the experience of duality, that create the understanding that there is no truly a separation. There is no separation really between that which is whole and the parts, other than the concept you apply onto it. For example, I was thinking as I was talking, you could say you have a car, or you could say you have 4 wheels and a metal plate and a wheel, and you drive it. Or you could just say you have a car. So depending on the concept of the word that you use to make the parts a whole thing, that will determine how you experience that thing. So going back to reality right now, depending on how you see reality as just oneness without any concepts, or if you see it in a conceptually way, this will determine how deeply you can perceive the oneness reality. Are you stuck in concepts, in conceptual thinking, or can you look beyond that and see that all is truly one and we just make up words and meanings within that oneness?
Is encounter something like a formless and potential chaos. I mean, we're not omniscient, obviously, and we can't just do whatever we want, but we encounter a formless and chaotic potential. That's always what we're grappling with, and somehow we use our consciousness to give that form. And this is how people act. Like
you say somehow we give the potential for experience, for chaos, form. The somehow is we do it simply by, well, from the human perspective, we do it by, as I just said recently, prior to this, by identifying duality. That's how we give things form. That might sound like, what? What do you mean, Tiger? You see, when it comes to truth, the same thing is basically said, but in different ways constantly. So I'm going to say it again. In any given moment, my fellow expressions of consciousness, you can look at the things within the moment. Look around your room right now. Look around yourself right now, your body. Look at the things around it. Are those things not within the moment you are having? Of course they are. So you can pinpoint with your mind, your perception, the things within the moment. And in that moment of perceiving or picking out, pointing out one individual thing, object, you then create this subject-object relationship. You can do that, and that's fine, and we need to do that a lot. However, you also have the ability to not look at the object as an object. Just take the experience of the moment itself and don't identify, don't touch mentally anything within your awareness. Just be in the knowing that you are having a moment. Not a moment and a glass, a moment and a microphone, a moment and another person. Just a moment, just now. You always have those two perspectives. The second one, which is the deeper one, allows you to see oneness. The first one takes you seemingly away from oneness into duality, which is necessary again to experience and interact with people.
If you look at how they regard themselves, it's how they act, because you say things to people like, well, you should live up to your potential. And you make a case that there's something about a person that's more than what is, that yet could be if only they participated in the process properly. And everyone...
The idea of living up to your potential comes from the deep understanding that we all have of abundance, that we can do more. We can always do more because we are that infinite pure consciousness perceiving through our minds, which are limited. But the source of self is so free, it just doesn't know limitations, such as when you are living life just as consciousness as when you are dreaming. That dream can conjure up any version of yourself. So that ability to conjure up any version of yourself in the mind realm seeps into this so-called waking state. It's always with you, the knowledge that you can do more. You can do more. And the reason you believe that is because you know you are more fundamentally. You just haven't really maybe looked at it enough. So yes, potential is beyond the sky because you are beyond the sky. The sky is within you. The earth is within you. The universe is within you. Have you ever experienced the universe outside of you? You meaning consciousness? No. Because whenever you are saying that the universe is above your head or you are in the universe, again, you can go to that second perspective of seeing that, no, you are looking at the moment itself, which includes the universe. Understand, the universe is included within your experience. You are not included in the universe's experience. You'd have to imagine that. All you know is the universe is included within your experience, and everybody has that experience, including animals. It's within you. You'd have to use imagination to try and get out of that. Yet the imagination is also within you.
Knows what that means, and no one acts like a mystery has been uttered when you say that. And you can see a situation in your own life that's full of potential. You're often extremely excited when you encounter something that's full of potential, because what you see is something that could be. You see a future beckoning for you that could be if only you interacted with it properly. And
that excitement, just to say, is the mind excitement, and those mind or mental excitements, they come and go. So just wanted to say, if you do get excited about trying something, understand that if that which you are trying and you might think is going to bring you success in some way, let's say it's a business idea, if it doesn't work straight away, keep your discipline. If you're trying to lose weight, if you don't lose the weight fast, keep with your discipline, because the mind will fluctuate because it's fickle. So the mind will get excited, but it won't stay excited. So discipline is required in some areas. Now your mind can stay excited with some things, yes, of course. But if it doesn't, if it wanes, whatever it is that you're excited about, just know that it's okay. It's okay. Discipline, and it doesn't mean what you are doing should be stopped necessarily. You can still find that excitement again.
It activates your nervous system, right, in a very basic way. And we even understand how that happens to the degree that we understand how the nervous system works, because the systems that mediate positive emotion, which are governed roughly by the neurochemical dopamine, and which have their roots way down in the ancient hypothalamus, a very, very archaic and fundamental part of the brain, that responds to potential, which is the possibility of accruing something new and valuable. It responds to potential with active movement.
I have to just say, for the record, the brain is within consciousness. Consciousness is not within the brain. I've spoken about this before, but I won't go into it right now.
Forward and engagement. And so we're engaged in the world as potential, and it looks like consciousness does that. And so there's this idea that, and this is the main idea that I think is being put forth in Genesis.
There needs to be a distinction between the mind and consciousness. And the mind and, the mind and consciousness.
It's one, it's something like, and you see this in mythology, like from what I've been able to gather, there's always three causal elements that make up being at the bottom of world mythology. And one is the formless potential that makes up being once it's interacted with, and that's generally given a feminine nature. And I think that's because it's like the source from which all things emerge and rise. It's something like that.
Not in all schools of thought, but fair enough.
It's more complicated than that, but it's something like that. And then there's some kind of interpretive structure that has to grapple with that formless potential. And I think that's the sort of thing that was alluded to by Immanuel Kant when he was criticizing the notion that all of our information comes from sense data, which would be the pure empirical perspective, right? Because when you encounter the world, you encounter it with a cognitive structure that already has shape. And so it's already in you, this structure. And without that a priori structure, you wouldn't be able to take the formless potential and give it structure. And I think that's something, it's akin in some way to the idea of God the Father. And I'll try to develop that idea more. It's the notion that there's something in all of us that transcends all of us, that's deeply structural, that's part of this ancient, well, I would say evolutionary and cultural process that enables us to grapple with the formless potential and bring forth reality, roughly speaking.
Yeah, it's us. It's simply the wonder, the majesty of our true self. We are doing this. We can't say how we are doing this, but we know it's us. We are perceiving the world. The same way we can't say how we are breathing, how we are firing neurons, but it's us that's doing it. There are different levels, different layers to self. That's what it is. There's different layers to self, but it's still us. And if you try to understand it with the mind, you're not going to get as far as you might like to, dear scientists. At some point, you have to relax in the knowing that it's you. And it doesn't need to be known by the mind. But it's you, and it's wonderful. You are creating the moment, the deeper aspects of you. Just as you create the dream, you don't know how you are creating the dream. Would you say it isn't you that is creating your dream? Of course you would not. You are creating your dream. In the same way, you are creating the moment. Wow.
And then there's the final element, and that element seems to be something like consciousness itself, the consciousness that actually inheres in the individual. So it's not only that you have a structure, it's that the structure has the capacity for action in the world. And it's like, you're the spirit that gives the dead structure life. It's something like that. And as far as I can tell, the Trinitarian notion that characterizes Christianity is something like, well, formless potential, which is never given the status of a deity in Christianity. And then the notion that there's an a priori interpretive structure that's a consequence of our ancient existence as beings. It goes back as far in time as you can go, the notion of a structure. And then the idea of a consciousness that is the tool of that structure and that interacts with the world.
That consciousness would be the mind, though. This is why I said earlier, there needs to be distinction in this talk of the mind and consciousness, because the mind is an extension of consciousness, yes. It's not separate per se. Just as the color red is not separate from the metal on the fire truck. But there is a distinction.
Gives it reality, and that's the word as far as I can tell. And so the notion is that there's a father, and that's the structure, and there's a son that's transcendent.
And I'm understanding now, when he keeps saying structure, what he really means is that stability, that which is always that source. That's what he's really saying when he's saying structure. And yes, there is something that is that source. You can call it God, I'm happy with that. You can call it source, I'm happy with that. Pure consciousness, I don't mind. Awareness. But yeah, there is a source. And then from that source, or within that source, is the ability to create duality, and that's the mind.
Transcendent that characterizes consciousness itself, and that it's the sun, the speaking of the sun, that is the active principle that turns chaos into order.
And to say chaos, that seems like doesn't seem like the right word. Let me get a dictionary definition of chaos, because the formless potential isn't chaos. For example, when you are sleeping, you are not experiencing chaos. You're experiencing the most peace, if you will, that you could have even contemplate experiencing in your waking state. You're not even aware of it. That's how unchaotic it is. There are no other things to it. It's just that peace. It's not chaos. See, that's the mind imagining that there's all of these potential things that can happen. What chaos? You could fall over tomorrow. You could win the lottery. You could become a football player. You could find a beautiful girl. You could break your PlayStation. You could do all these things. It's all in potential. That's the mind thinking, because the mind can only think in terms of singular things. The mind can't take multiple things at once. The mind is more sharp. It's more of a pointer. Points at this thing, that thing, that thing. You can't look at two fingers, for example, 100% on each. You can't put your focus. You can't put 100% of your focus on two separate fingers, for example. Like, that's how limited the mind is. Try that. 100% of your focus on two individual fingers or more. You can't do that because the mind isn't set up like that. So it's not chaos. I feel like he's saying that because other people say that. I don't know. Why say chaos? It's not chaos. That source. It's actually completely at, to use a word in this realm, mental realm, peace. Because there's no otherness to it. So chaos, complete disorder and confusion. No way is it that. Again, the mind conceives that it could be like that because the mind itself is prone to chaos and confusion when it has to try to multitask, for example. So imagine the mind is thinking, oh, I have to multitask, or there's a potential to multitask millions of things. That would feel like chaos because the mind can't even multitask that well on a small amount of things. But yeah, it's not chaos. It's, if anything, peace. It's bliss.
God, it's such a sophisticated idea as far as I'm concerned, because, well, there's something about it that's at least phenomenologically accurate, because you do have an interpretive structure and you couldn't understand anything without it. Your very body is an interpretive structure.
100%. 100%. Your very body is an interpretive structure. The mind is an interpretive structure. They are what allow for duality. For sure.
Right? It's been crafted over, let's say, 3 billion years of evolution. Without that,
debatable.
You wouldn't be able to perceive anything. And it's taken a lot of death and struggle and tragedy to produce you, the thing that's capable of encountering this immense chaos that surrounds us, and to
Again, you see, I'm talking on one level, he's talking on another level. I'm not necessarily saying higher or lower, but I would say deeper for sure, my level, where I'm coming from. Because it isn't really chaos. Again, it's just everything works as it's supposed to work. Like, if a thing is broken, that thing is perfectly broken. If a thing is good, that thing is perfectly good. If you come out the room with 6 fingers, then you perfectly came out the room with 6 fingers. It's only with our beliefs where we say that some things are right or wrong, or some things are pain and sadness and happiness, all of these things, or not right, correct. But if you look at it from a deeper perspective, everything is literally what it is, perfectly. This is what it is, perfectly. This moment is what it is, perfectly. I have no other moment to judge it against because the moment is gone. It's now another moment. I've shifted into a new reality where I now have memories of the old reality where I picked this up. Do you see? There's just a moment, a reality, a reality, a reality. We are constantly shifting. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of time, which is so conceptual with the mind, that it's not even really possible to get to the depths of reality if you're perceiving in terms of cause and effect and time. It's just a mental construct. It's useful, obviously, but not for going deep into truth, which is that there's just now shifting moments. This word chaos is really not the right word. It's not chaos. The universe knows what it's doing. It's beautiful what's happening. You could say chaos on like the really surface level of, I don't know, war, something like that. You know, from the perspective of nature, like, or love, how we're hurting each other. You could call that chaotic, or people stampeding at a football event. Yeah, you could say it's chaotic, because it is. But on a deeper level, because he's talking about consciousness, we got to go deep. On a deeper level, there is no chaos. There is just what is. There is just what is, and what is perfectly what it is. That's why you can even talk about it perfectly. You can perfectly talk about chaos because the source of the moment is not chaotic. That's why you can even conceive of chaos, because what you truly are is imperturbable. Chaos is of the mind only, but you are so much deeper than that, my friend.
Transform it into habitable order. And then there's the idea too, of course, that's deeply embedded in the first chapters of Genesis, which is a staggering idea, you know, and certainly not one that's likely, that human beings were made in the image of God. Both male and female were made in the image of God. And that's, of course, a very difficult thing to understand, partly because the God that's referred to in those chapters has a kind of polytheistic element.
We are made in the image of God, just like how our dream body is made in the image of the mind. You see, consciousness, you could say, is the mind of this waking state. And we are made in the image of it, and we are that. So your body, for example, you are perceiving it, but the experience of the body is not taking place in the body because you are perceiving the experience of the body. You might say, oh, I can't see behind my body. No, you can't see behind your body because your eyes have a limitation, of course. Yet you are still aware of the body, behind the body. You can touch behind the body. You can feel behind the body. So the experience of the body, behind the body, is still within the moment. And experiences are being perceived by something distinct from the moment. Let me say that again. You can still experience the back of your body. You can feel it. You can think about it. But easier to say you can feel the back of your body. And that feeling the back of the body is an experience. That which is experiencing the experience is distinct. That's why it's aware of the experience. Like when you're watching a TV screen, you are aware of the experience of the TV screen because you are not the TV screen. There's a distinction. So the experience of your body is taking place within or in front of this awareness of it. The body is in front of the awareness of it. It's an image within the awareness of it. Going back to that religious notion of being made in the image of God. The body is an image within your awareness. Just as your mind body is an image, your dream body is an image within your mind.
Although it's an element that's moving rapidly towards a unified monotheism. But it's not also obvious to me why people would come up with that concept, because I don't really think that when we think about each other, we immediately think God-like. the notion that
Again, he's talking about God in a different way to what I am, which is fine. But I have to take it deeper as always. And yes, we don't think of each other as godlike, and we don't also think of each other as expressions of this one singular source or consciousness. And guess what? We're not supposed to. It's supposed to be an individual journey, a choice. A kind of choice.
every single human being, regardless of their peculiarities and strangenesses and sins and crimes and all of that, has something divine in them that needs to be regarded with respect and that plays an integral role, at least an analogous role, in the creation of habitable order out of chaos. That's a magnificent, remarkable, crazy idea. And yet we developed it, and I do firmly believe that it sits at the base of our legal system. I think it is the cornerstone of our legal system. That's the notion that everyone is equal before God, which is, of course, that's such a strange idea. It's very difficult to understand how anybody could have ever come up with that idea, because...
Really? Why strange? It's just a notion that there is something greater, and none of us can compare to that which is greater, our physical selves. So we are all equal from that perspective. If you're thinking about God as this higher being,
all differences between people are so obvious and so evident that you could say the natural way of viewing someone is, or human beings, is in this extremely hierarchical manner, where some people are contemptible and easily brushed off as
I do believe, like some Muslims say to me, that we all have this innate knowing. Well, they would say God, but I'll just say a deeper aspect of self. I would say God as well, but I don't mean God in the way that they mean God. So I do believe that we all have this innate knowing, that we are more than just what we perceive of ourselves.
As pointless and pathological and without value whatsoever, and all the power accrues to a certain tiny, aristocratic minority at the top. But if you look at the way that the idea of the individual sovereignty developed, it's clear that it unfolded over thousands and perhaps 10,000s of years before it became something firmly fixed in the imagination that each individual had something of transcendent value about them. And
although it says this in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's older than the Bible, so again, he's just talking from the Western perspective, as Western speakers usually do.
Man, I tell you, we dispense with that idea at our serious peril. And so, and if you're going to take that idea seriously, then, which you do because you act it out, because otherwise you wouldn't be law-abiding citizens, right? You act that idea out. It's firmly shared by everyone who acts.
It's a big assumption to suggest that we wouldn't be law-abiding citizens if it wasn't for that.
Acts in a civilized manner. The question is, why in the world do you believe it, assuming that you believe what you act out, which I think is a really good way of
going back to what I just said, because yes, maybe things like, I don't know, fighting, that might happen more if there was no laws. But things like murder and other really bad things, I don't think it would just be like a free-for-all. Yes, it would happen more, of course, but it wouldn't just be a free-for-all. I think there'd still be a healthy balance of more people against the really bad stuff than people doing the bad stuff, because there's this strong understanding of empathy. When we hurt another, we really can understand how that must feel.
Mentally defining belief. So, all right, so that's the sort of idea, is that there's this
there will always be healers in the world, I guess is what I'm saying, always, because our true source is of oneness, and healing is to bring us back to oneness. So it will always filter through.
God of tradition and structure, that's God the Father, who uses the Son, which is more of an active force, and primarily something...
True.
It's verbal, which I also think is extremely interesting, because it's associated not with thought precisely, but with speech. And I think the reason for that is that there's something to speech that's more than mere thought. And I think part of the reason for that is that speech is a public utterance. And at least in principle, speech is something that's shaped by the existence of of everyone else, at least across time. Because when you speak, your speech is put forward in the world as a causal element, and it's also subject to criticism and cooperation and mutual.
Yes, I'll go along with that. Speech does hold more weight than thought in our world, for sure.
Shaping. And so there's an idea here too that's
because speech is a commitment to the thought that you had. You can have a thought and then change it, and nobody would ever know you changed your thought. But if you speak something, you're making a commitment to that thought.
Speech is that
you can still change it, of course, but it's not as easy. For example, apologizing. You can apologize for something, but it's not as easy for someone to just believe that you are really apologizing or really sorry, for example. So yeah, speech is a commitment to the words you're saying.
The cognitive processes that bring
speech is a commitment to the thoughts that you have.
Habitable reality out of uninhabitable chaos have this collective and public element, which is part of the reason, by the way, that I'm an advocate of free speech, let's say, above all, because I don't think, although it is the case, for example, in the Canadian Bill of Rights, that every single right has equal value. That's the theory. It's an idiotic theory because it's absolutely impossible for a large set of rights to have absolutely equal stances. That cannot happen.
That's very true. How can it be equal? There are different levels.
But there's no way that can ever work. But that is the legal judgment. But I think it's a huge mistake because free speech has this divine quality, let's say, that you can't escape from because it's the thing that manufactures everything else. And I do think that the dream that you could think of as encapsulated in the stories in Genesis is the dream by which human beings dreamed up the idea that we would now consider consciousness, because it took us a long time to.
Yeah, you could say we dreamed up the idea of consciousness because it's just a thought that there's this thing called consciousness. We basically try and talk about ourselves, but a lot of us are not realizing we are talking about ourselves when we are talking about consciousness. Because a lot of the scientists look at consciousness as a property of the body, or an aspect of the body, a property of what one is, an aspect of what one is. But someone like myself and other people with my school of thought are saying, no, it's not a property of you, it is you.
To figure out the word consciousness, it's not like it's bloody obvious. Who knows how many thousands of years or who knows what struggles we had to undertake to abstract out something like consciousness. What did he say is not obvious? It took us a long time to figure out the word consciousness. It's not like it's bloody obvious. Who knows how many thousands of years or who knows what's.
It doesn't matter what word we call it. Different languages will have different words for consciousness. It doesn't matter. It's not that deep, to be honest, the word consciousness. Again, the power isn't within the word. The words are trying to speak on that which we are. You could call it spaghetti. It wouldn't matter. It really wouldn't matter because no word can really truly describe what we really are. Consciousness is a word we use. I'm sure there's a simple etymology for it. But it's not so serious what we call it because it's not it anyway.
Struggles we had to undertake to abstract out something like consciousness and how we had to represent that dramatically, say, or symbolically, or in a dreamlike fashion before we could actually formulate the term and localize that to some degree in people. It's very sophisticated.
Okay, that's it. Well, I gave you my opinions as it was going along. I hope you've enjoyed this reaction video. And again, if you'd like me to do more things like this, let me know in the comments below. Let me know who you'd like me to react to as well. You can even send me some actual videos that you'd like me to react to. And as always, have a wonderful day or evening, my fellow expressions of consciousness. Peace.